Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight, one-on-one with the leader of the Illinois House on his first 100 days on the job.
Chicago's top doctor on the resumption of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the latest updates on the Loretto hospital scandal, and much more.
Nobody knows how to go about this. Nobody knows how to resume a normal life.
COVID-19 has put some Americans on disability benefits, but is the system built for it?
It just made everything more challenging and more expensive.
How the pandemic is impacting poverty in the U.S.
Crop prices are expected to surge and spill over onto grocery store shelves. That and more from Crane's Chicago Business.
Leaders from local philanthropic organizations share why they think black representation matters in Chicago's charitable organizations.
It made us feel better about our future in terms of, his independence.
And a Chicago bakery where unique people are the icing on the cake. But first, some of today's top stories. A small drop in Illinois' population will still make a big difference in the state's congressional delegation. The Census Bureau released the 2020 census today, and Illinois is one of just 3 states to lose population. A population decline of just 0.14%, or 18,000 residents, means the state will lose 1 seat in the U.S. House of Representatives for a total of 17 members. Republican members of the state's General Assembly blame Democrats for policies that they say have driven people out of the state.
That means in Washington, D.C., we have less influence. Illinois has a strong history of tremendous influence on Capitol Hill, but we see that continue to wane because of the policies that emanate out of Springfield.
The census figures kickstarts efforts to redraw the state's legislative maps, which are redrawn every 10 years to reflect population and demographic changes. The General Assembly and Governor J.B. Pritzker have until June 30th to redraw them. The city of Chicago is suing an Indiana gun store, claiming it's responsible for selling hundreds, if not thousands, of firearms that made their way to Chicago to commit at least 850 violent crimes.
They are selling thousands of crime guns every year. And the time for us to stop to ask them to do better, make sure that they're not selling to straw purchasers, do what they're required to do as a federally licensed gun dealer is over. We tried that. It hasn't worked. So now we're in litigation with them.
Mayor Lori Lightfoot has repeatedly argued that Indiana is one of Illinois' neighboring states with lax gun laws, allowing weapons to flow into the city. The lawsuit filed in Cook County Chancery Court accuses the owner of West 4th Sports in Gary of allowing customers to lie about plans to resell guns, known as straw sales. The suit seeks a court order requiring the store to stop contributing to gun trafficking and pay damages, which have yet to be determined. The Chicago Police Department is on the defensive after a tweet that appeared to show CPD supporting former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin went viral. The tweet looks as if it's from the department's official Twitter account, showing an image of Chauvin, who was convicted last week of murdering George Floyd, with the caption, quote, "We are all Derek Chauvin." But CPD says that tweet is clearly synthetic and manipulated, which is, quote, antithetical to our values and reflect the very worst of disinformation on social media. It also puts our officers and communities at risk by widening the gap in trust that we're working so hard to build. CPD says that it did report the tweet, but Twitter says it didn't violate policy and took no action. Illinois public health officials say 2,100 people have been diagnosed with the coronavirus since yesterday, and 10 people have died. The state's total number of positive cases is over 1.323 million, and 21,836 people have died. The state's test positivity rate is 4.1%. It's down from 4.7% a week ago. And now to Amanda Vinicky and a one-on-one with the leader of the Illinois House. Amanda.
Brandis, for the first time since 1997, the Illinois House got a new leader in January, Emmanuel Chris Welch of Hillside. He's been on the job 100 days now, and Welch joins us to talk about how it's going and what's ahead as Springfield gears up to meet an end of May adjournment deadline. Thank you so much, Speaker. We are glad that you are with us. And now, I do actually think it's 103 days that you have been Speaker of the Illinois House. Congratulations. And one major change within that time is term limits have passed the House, no more than 10 consecutive years serving in a position such as Speaker. Now, your predecessor, of course, served 36 years as Speaker. What do you hope this change, this term limits, will make?
Well, Amanda, first of all, let me say it's such an honor and a privilege to be here with you tonight. I will tell you that I certainly hope that this is the first of many steps that will show the public that we're serious about bringing about change here in Springfield, that we're serious about rebuilding trust in our legislature. And I do believe that if you make a promise in this business, you should keep it. And I told my colleagues, I told people in the community that I believed in leadership term limits. And we put it in our House rules. And then we further seek to codify it by putting it in a bill, like I talked about on January 13th that afternoon. It's in a bill that passed the House unanimously, and I'm hoping for favorable consideration in the Senate.
Speaking of Madigan, you have, including during your inauguration speech, praised his tenure. Let's take a listen.
I honestly believe that we have to thank and acknowledge that our state would not be where it is today without Speaker Madigan. We have to acknowledge that fact.
And what do you mean by that? How is Illinois better off after his 36 years in that role?
Well, I think what people have to recognize is that there are a lot of significant legislative achievements under Speaker Madigan. A lot of them are very progressive. Illinois is a dark blue state when we're surrounded by red states that are taking away rights from working families, that are taking away rights from women when it comes to reproductive health. Illinois is a very progressive state, and we want some big things under Madigan's leadership, including marriage equality. We've increased the minimum wage. We've passed the ERA. We have passed 3 huge bills that protects women's reproductive health, HB 40, the RHA, and a number of other things that we've done here that really put women at the forefront. While we have states right around us in Missouri, Indiana, Kentucky, Wisconsin, that are taking rights away from people. And we've also been very ahead of our neighbors when it comes to voting rights. And a lot of that was due to the leadership of Mike Madigan.
And critics, I think, would also point out some of the budgetary issues. We're going to try to get back to that. I want to, however, look to the future. You are the first Black person to hold that title of Illinois House Speaker. So historic right there. And then just last week, we also, of course, saw the historic verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial, found guilty of having murdered George Floyd. Now, you know that policing continues to be a concern, particularly in communities of color. What specifically can the state do about that? I know something the General Assembly is considering is ending qualified immunity for police officers. What is your position?
Well, I think the legislature in January during our lame duck session took significant steps to move us forward in that space when we passed the criminal justice reform package. And we should be really proud of that momentous step that we took then. In fact, it was passed about an hour before I became Speaker of the House. That was a really historic day for us here in the Illinois General Assembly. I think it's important that we give that historic legislation some time to work because I do believe that it's going to be a model for reform across the nation. I certainly think it's a start and we have more work to do. But I think you have to let legislation work and assess it and determine where you go.
And it certainly is so major. I mean, a lot of changes, ending cash bail amongst many others. What about another issue, an elected school board for Chicago public schools? You, of course, served on the school board in Proviso, and you have endorsed a measure that would give Chicago a 21-seat elected school board. Is that the only proposal that you favor, or what do you think about this hybrid plan that Mayor Lori Lightfoot is pushing?
Well, Amanda, I have supported an elected school board ever since I've been here in the legislature. I'm a product of an elected school board. An elected school board really prepared me well for what I do here in the legislature. And so my vote on the elected school board passed by Leader Ramirez a couple of weeks ago was just consistent with my votes on the bill in the past. But this is the legislature, and negotiation is an important part of what we do. And I think it's important to, get the parties around a table and see if we can come to some common ground. And the mayor filed a proposal after that bill passed, and I do believe the parties are preparing to get around the table and see if they can come to an agreement. And I think that's just the right thing to do, and that's how we do it here in Springfield.
So open to a compromise there. Now, speaking of, you did say during your inauguration speech that politics has become too divisive, and you promised to work together with legislators from both sides of the aisle. Here's a clip of that.
While we won't always agree because of where we come from, I want to ensure that each of my colleagues knows that I want to work with you directly.
But just last week, Republican State Representative Tim Butler called those promises, in his words, BS, fuming on the floor that you jammed up a proposal that he's sponsoring, even though it has bipartisan support. Here's a look.
We got a lot of people. We represent 5 million Illinoisans on this side of the aisle. 5 million. And our bills are being ignored. I'm sick of it. Sick of it. It's supposed to be a new day.
How do you respond to that?
Well, I believe that was a lot of posturing and political rhetoric. I think that that's the type of rhetoric that has to be lowered because Representative Butler looks at the data. He will see that both Democratic bills and Republican bills have been moving through the legislature. Third reading
But on
deadline.
an uneven scale, right? Something like 4-1 Democrat to Republican bills?
Well, Amanda, we're a supermajority. I mean, those numbers are never going to be even. Illinois is a supermajority state in both the House and the Senate. And so that's not, a fair comparison. Those numbers are never going to be even. And so that's why it's just rhetoric to insinuate that we're not working across the aisle. I've had Republicans in my office, and for the first time, they're saying, we've never seen the inside of this office. Their bills are passing because they're working with the Speaker of the Illinois House. They're doing
Something
things
very
they never
different than the Madigan approach.
Absolutely. And so, we can't use one person's rhetoric to cast an aspersion on the entire process, because the process is working. And I'm being very intentional about reaching across the aisle and working with them. But as I said in that clip, there's going to be some things that we agree on. There's going to be some things we disagree on as well. We have to just be consistent and persistent, and we're going to continue to do that.
And thank you very much. Our first time with you, an interview on Chicago Tonight with Speaker Chris Welch, but we hope the first of many times, so thank you very much.
Amanda, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And now, Paris, we go back to you.
Thanks, Amanda. The single-shot Johnson & Johnson vaccine is back in circulation in Chicago after it was paused due to the occurrence of rare blood clots in some recipients. This as COVID-19 cases in Illinois and Chicago are declining after the most recent surge. But across the state and country, vaccine administration rates are also falling. So are Chicago and the nation still on track to reach herd immunity? Joining us with the latest is Dr. Allison Arwady, Commissioner of the Chicago Department of Public Health. Dr. Arwady, good to see you as always. Let's start with the J&J vaccine, back online since Saturday. How many sites are you administering the J&J vaccine, and are you hearing anybody refuse to get it because of safety concerns?
Yeah, so really our top goal is to make sure that people have options. We've been careful to label on ZocDoc.com/vaccine which kind of vaccine we're using at City of Chicago sites. Over the weekend, we started using it, for example, at one of our walk-in sites at Kennedy King, and we saw people coming looking for it. We also really are excited about J&J in a lot of our more mobile sites where people maybe didn't start out their day thinking their plan was to get a vaccine, but you put an opportunity in front of folks and they say, yeah, I've been meaning to do that. So we're bringing our Vax Bus back online. We're using it for homebound, and then we're doing a lot more with college students and others. So all kinds of plans, and excited to have a third vaccine back.
So maybe the allure of one shot and you're done helps out a little bit. On-site appointments started on Friday, or walk-ins in Chicago. Does that mean the supply is meeting the demand that anyone can just walk up and they will get a shot?
It is, and I cannot emphasize enough how excited we are about that. Really, for the first time, just last week, we have enough vaccine for anybody who wants a vaccine in Chicago. So we still encourage people to make an appointment. That way we know you have a dose for you. You won't have to wait. You can call 312-746-4835, or you can go online, ZocDoc.com/vaccine, or to your provider or pharmacy. But otherwise, yes, all City of Chicago sites are taking walk-ins. That does include the United Center. And if you have the idea, now's my chance to get a vaccine. See if you can bring someone along with you and take that opportunity.
Because the challenge now is some of the holdouts here. Are you worried that vaccine hesitancy among whichever group of people might cause Chicago not to hit that 70 or 80% threshold for herd immunity?
So we are a little bit ahead of the United States already in terms of our coverage numbers, and we're making good progress every day. I think the main thing that we want to emphasize, and as we shift to there being enough vaccine, this is going to feel more and more like our typical flu shot campaign, where it's not a problem of can you find a flu shot? It's about, do I make the decision to take the time out of my day to protect myself and my community? So we're shifting a lot of our strategies to bring vaccine to people. Think about where you wait, right? The DMV, where you go every day, the grocery store. How can we sort of fit vaccine opportunities into things that Chicagoans are already doing? Because we know there's a lot of people who it's less about I feel hesitant and more just that I need some convenience and I need good access. So we're working on building vaccine confidence, but at the same time, really doing a lot of creative things, I think, related to vaccine access.
And across the country, there are some states and some areas that are lower vaccinated than other, perhaps because of misinformation or just a general feeling that they don't want it. Are you worried that the country as a whole might not hit that herd immunity by the summer?
Yeah, I think it's a concern that everybody in public health is sharing, really, in every community. We need to get a lot of folks vaccinated here to be able to put COVID behind us. And that's just as true in Chicago as it is in downstate Illinois or across the U.S. So I think, at this point, it's a lot about having the conversations, recognizing it's no problem if you weren't the first to raise your hand. But now there is opportunity. And, we just want to be able to have more fun this summer and put this all behind us, take those masks off. And all of that is dependent on us being able to get a higher proportion, of the city, or in this case, the country, vaccinated.
And this latest mini surge of COVID seems to have leveled off. The city dipped below 5% of positivity rate just today. Are you confident that that surge is peaking and on the other side now?
Yeah, we're certainly feeling much, much better than we were 2 weeks ago, particularly looking at what had happened in Michigan and seeing their hospitals really fill up. So yeah, now that we're coming up on about 14 days of that declining numbers, declining positivity, I think we'll be able to make some more reopening. This is our goal. Keep reopening, and keep getting vaccinated, because the risk at this point is less about how many cases there are in Chicago and more about, are the settings that you are in heavily vaccinated? And if you yourself are fully vaccinated, 2 weeks post your second dose, and it's important to get that second dose unless you get J&J, your risk is really relatively low for getting COVID. So it's a new calculus, but yes, I'm feeling confident that we're in a place where we'll be able to do some more reopening, and my hope is to just keep turning that dial toward opening all the way toward the summer.
All right, let's talk about Loretto Hospital. The city now is operating a vaccine clinic out of there after all those reports of off-site vaccinations and improper vaccinations. Are you confident that Loretto has fixed what was going on?
So the reason that we've been working closely with Loretto is that, of course, there's such an important healthcare provider for the Austin community, and that is one of our less vaccinated parts in Chicago. So we really think it's critical that we can build capacity there. We are still on site. There are folks from CDPH who are there every day, and we've been working to make sure that the registrations are appropriate, really working to make sure that the team's fully trained. And it's been a partnership in terms of recognizing that Loretto serves an important role in that community, and we want to rebuild, some of that trust, because in the long-term way, making sure people feel that they can trust their healthcare partner and the place where they get healthcare is critical. So we're pleased to be playing a role in getting that trust rebuilt, and most importantly, getting Austin vaccinated.
Part of rebuilding that trust is understanding exactly what happened, and Loretto put out an audit that didn't really mention how it came to be that the CEO and the COO had connections to some of these off-site vaccination places. I mean, what did you learn about that?
So certainly, at the health department level, there's things that we're looking for. We're looking for is all the reporting up to date. We're looking at where vaccines are being administered. I think certainly Loretto has been, quite vocal about the fact that they absolutely did the wrong thing here. Most of their vaccinating was appropriate, but they did let people with connections really jump the line, and they've not tried to hide that, which I appreciate it. They've owned it and said, we want to do better, and we're willing to work with the city. Again, my main goal at this point is getting folks vaccinated, and I do think they play a really critical role in that community. So we're working with them and continuing to make sure that they're really totally caught up and everything is absolutely appropriate when it comes to reporting, and working on some of their computer systems and issues to work on some of the structural issues that perhaps made it less easy for them to make sure that all their reporting was completely appropriate and up to date.
That is one of the things it did say in the audit, that they had some problem with their computer systems. All right, Dr. Allison Arwady, thank you for joining us as always.
Thank you.
And up next, a look at the pandemic's impact on poverty, so please stick around.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight, Black Voices. What do you believe prevents a strong coalition of Black and Latino communities forming across the communities?
I want us to, as a nation, to find a way to come together.
Go down the block, get it from someone local, and keep the money in the community.
Black joy and the Black experience is magical.
The poverty rate reached its highest point yet during the pandemic last month at 11.7%. That's according to researchers at the universities of Chicago and Notre Dame, who are using monthly census data to capture the coronavirus's financial impact in real time. Tonight, as part of our Firsthand Living in Poverty series, we take a look at the pandemic's impact on poverty. Joining us are Bruce Meyer, professor at the University of Chicago Harris School of Public Policy. He's currently researching the pandemic's impact on poverty in the U.S. And Audra Wilson, the president and CEO of the Shriver Center on Poverty Law. Welcome back to Chicago Tonight, both of you. Audra Wilson, let's start with you, please. How has the pandemic impacted poverty in the U.S.?
Unfortunately, Brenda, our economy still remains weak. The job recovery has lost some momentum, and there are millions fewer jobs than there was a year ago. And Black and Latino unemployment is much higher. It's around 9.9%, 8.55% respectively, which is well above the white unemployment rate. And that itself is too high. And the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, projects that the economy is not going to return until its full potential until about 2025. The number of people who are employed will not be re-employed until or reaching post-pandemic levels until 2024, and unemployment's not going to fall until about 2026. So this is still a very difficult period of time, and there's a lot of hardship for many Americans, especially among Black, Latino, and Indigenous people and immigrants.
A long road ahead, it sounds like. Bruce Meyer, you've been following COVID's impact on poverty by using monthly census data. From your research, March saw the highest poverty rate in the pandemic so far at 11.7%. Why do you think that is?
Well, the rescue plan dollars hadn't been paid out quite yet when the census conducted the survey. I expect that the poverty rate will fall quite a bit given the payments and the expanded unemployment insurance, but people were without jobs for a long time and their incomes had fallen over the year and poverty rose. It's been a bit of a roller coaster.
To say the least, I'm sure. Earlier today, we spoke with Hillary Waldron at Marillac St. Vincent Family Services on the West Side. She leads the homebound food program for older residents. Now, here's what she said about COVID's impact on the older residents they serve, who are often on fixed incomes. Let's listen.
I think one of the challenges of COVID is that everybody was under stress. So there was no one group could say, I can carry your burden for you, because everybody was carrying an additional burden. And so these informal networks and these ways that we've helped each other in the past were under an extreme amount of stress.
Audra, what is the long-term impact for folks who are either currently living in poverty or falling into poverty right now?
Well, I'm glad that Bruce mentioned the American Recovery Act, or Rescue Plan, excuse me. That's extraordinarily important because there were very key provisions to help lift people out of poverty. But what we really need to look for is to make sure that we make some of these permanent. One of the biggest parts of the rescue plan is making the full child tax credit available to 27 million children in families with low or no income, and increasing the earned income tax credit. So these are very important provisions if we're thinking about the long-term future. But now, quite frankly, is the time to seize this moment. That we've seen just how COVID has exposed the structural inequities that we deal with in Black and Brown communities. But there are opportunities for us to be able to move forward, not only with the rescue plan, but other sorts of provisions, both federally and locally, to be able to help families once and for all.
Bruce, your research also shows that those with a high school education or less had a poverty rate of about 22% in March. Black Americans saw a poverty rate of about 21%, and child poverty reached a high of about 17%. Bruce, what do these numbers tell you about who is being impacted?
Well, the impact of the pandemic on poverty has been very uneven across time and across different communities. So those with low education, Blacks, women, children, and those in states that have had a hard time paying out unemployment insurance have all seen their poverty rates go up much more than other groups.
And Audra, what can be done to help those who are living in poverty? And you know, we've talked about the stimulus, but is this latest stimulus that's been passed, is that a start?
I mean, certainly it's a start, but it can't stop there. So as I mentioned before, it's important to make some of the provisions of the rescue plan permanent. We really need to be looking at expanding that child tax credit and earned income tax credit. We need to be locally thinking about not only increasing living wage, but we also have to look at things like paid sick leave and other sorts of income supports that can really help families with low wages be able to subsist and workers to be able to lift themselves out of poverty. As Bruce mentioned, the cumulative effect of COVID is what we're still seeing right now. So though these measures more immediately are helping to be able to get money into these families, we have to be thinking more long-term about how people are going to be able to recover. And increased income supports is going to be a key part of that recovery.
To that end, Bruce, you know, tonight the three of us have talked a lot about these income supports and credits for families and these federal programs. Does your research at all discuss the impact of something that we've heard a lot more about over the last year that hadn't really been talked about as much, the universal basic income?
Well, you can see in our numbers that the payments that went out last year reduced poverty quite dramatically. So not universal basic income, but expanded unemployment insurance and economic impact payments that sent cash payments to families. Those dramatically reduced poverty in the beginning of the recession. I think there are a lot of issues with universal basic income. You know, that's a whole nother topic, and I'm concerned with a universal basic income providing too much to people that don't need it and not enough to those that are really needy.
Right. That one has, it's gained a lot of controversy as well, but something that has been discussed more. That is where we'll have to leave it, and we'll talk about basic income next time. Audra Wilson and Bruce Meyer, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
And still to come on Chicago Tonight, a local restaurant group is requiring employees to get the COVID vaccine. Will more companies follow suit? That and more from Cranes. What obstacles people with long COVID symptoms are facing when trying to get disability benefits from Social Security. Philanthropic leaders on why they say diverse representation in charitable giving can make a difference in Black and Brown communities. And a local bakery brings together young adults with autism to bake unique desserts while building social and work skills. But first, some more of today's top stories. Spring season is typically when Chicagoans can expect to see road crews patching up winter's potholes. But this year, the city of Chicago is kicking off a multi-billion-dollar, multi-year effort to resurface and repave miles of major city streets and residential blocks.
These improvements prioritize making it as easy as possible to get around the city, as sustainably and affordably as possible. We want to encourage folks to walk, to bike, to take public transit. The investment in the infrastructure makes that happen. And as you heard the mayor say, makes our streets and our public way safe, inviting, prosperous, and welcoming.
The city's Chicago Works plan will also repair and replace bridges, sidewalks, crosswalk ramps, streetlights, and traffic signals. The mayor's office says the plan will also bring jobs to thousands of Chicagoans and address sustainability. The cost for 2021 is $600 million. The total cost of the Chicago Works plan is $3.7 billion, $1 billion of which is borrowed. For more on the mayor's 5-year effort to rebuild the city's infrastructure, you can visit our website. Chicago bird watchers are keeping an eagle eye out for the second half of a popular pair of piping plovers. Birders in the Montrose Beach area confirmed that Rose, the female plover, has returned to the area at Montrose Beach Dune. Now, they're waiting to see when Monty, her mate of the last 3 years, will arrive. Last year, the two arrived within a day of each other, despite setting out from far-flung starting points. The endangered breed has faced a loss of habitat, so the birding community has kept close watch on where the pair will choose to rear their broods. And also, you can read more about Monty and Rose at our website. And now to Paris for some of today's top business headlines. Paris.
Thanks, Brandis. Crop prices soar to an 8-year high. A local restaurant group is requiring its employees to get vaccinated against COVID-19. And Medina Temple is turning into a year-long pop-up. Here to go behind the headlines is Crain's Chicago business editor Ann Dwyer. Ann, great to see you. Starting with that first story, crop prices for things like corn and soybean and wheat, they're expected to surge. By how much and how come?
Well, the big drivers, Paris, behind this are really one of the biggest is demand in China, which has just been growing at a huge clip. Another factor is bad weather in some of these crop-producing countries. We're talking about everything from wheat and corn, as you mentioned, to vegetable oils. And all of this is adding up to a dramatic run-up in prices for these commodities. In some cases, there's an index that Bloomberg runs that it says these prices haven't been this high in at least 9 years, or nearly 9 years. And that, in turn, is sparking concern that consumers will soon see a run-up in prices at the retail level at their local grocery store. In fact, it's already happening in some markets. And of course, here in Chicago, we track all this stuff pretty closely because prices for these commodities are set right here in our exchanges.
Mm-hmm. What about farmers in Illinois? Are they happy with that news?
This benefits them, for sure.
Yeah, I know it's been a hard year for them weather-wise and pandemic-wise. All right, there's a restaurant group that is requiring its employees to get the vaccine before coming back to work. Tell me which group this is, and do you expect more companies to follow suit?
We're talking about 50/50 Restaurant Group, Paris, and they simply feel that this is good business for them. The company has had some experience on this front. Back in, I believe it was October, one of the co-owners of 50/50 Restaurant Group, which operates a lot of different restaurant brands around the city, did come down with COVID, and he told us that he unwittingly likely passed it to one of his chefs, and in the wake of that, they had to shut down for a period of time, and they want to avoid having that outcome again. They also feel like this gives their customers a measure of security, and hopefully that will bring people coming back. And I do think that they're one of the first to do this. But if they don't get a lot of pushback and it works, I wouldn't be surprised to see other restaurants follow suit.
Especially if they do get a lot of customers coming back in. All right, the final story, a new pop-up in a pretty famous building downtown. Tell us about that.
It's the Medina Temple, which has been home to Bloomingdale's department store for years, just until last fall. Since Bloomie's exited that building, the owners now are planning to convert this entire massive interior space into a revolving assortment of restaurants and shops. Now, this will be far bigger than any pop-up store that you or I have ever seen. The plan is to utilize all 135,000 square feet of this grand old building, and to rotate in new vendors on a quarterly basis. So it'll be really interesting to see if that works and if it's a draw.
That'll certainly be a spectacle and maybe a reuse that other buildings will pay attention to. All right, Ann, thank you so much.
Thanks, Paris.
COVID could be the largest disabling event since polio. That's how some disability rights advocates are seeing the pandemic's potential long-term impact on society. People who'd fall into this category are suffering from long COVID. So that means having persistent symptoms related to COVID-19 beyond 30 days from the initial onset of the illness or last positive test. So far, more than 32 million COVID cases have been reported in the U.S. Some doctors estimate long COVID could make up about 20 to 30% of those cases. And joining us now are Martina Sherman, a shareholder at Dubofsky, Sherman, Kashiari Reynolds, PC, a law firm that works on disability benefits, and Dr. Charles Davidson, Vice Chairman of Clinical Affairs at the Department of Medicine at Northwestern. He also oversees the Northwestern Medicine Comprehensive COVID-19 Center that does work with people who have long COVID. Welcome both of you to Chicago tonight. First with you.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Dr. Davidson, what are the long COVID symptoms that you're seeing, the most persistent symptoms here?
Yeah, so we're seeing a multitude of symptoms, which is why we stood up the Comprehensive COVID Center at Northwestern earlier this year. It was actually the second center in the country to do this. But the predominant symptoms we're seeing are dyspnea, so shortness of breath, particularly with exertion, fatigue, headaches, chest discomfort, chest pain, brain fog has been very common, lack of good concentration effort. All of those have been our most common symptoms that have occurred in the patients after 30 days.
And earlier today, Chicago Tonight did speak with someone that is experiencing long COVID symptoms, and he's debating whether or not to go on disability. Take a listen.
Just talking to other people that are experiencing the same thing, the information's not out there. And there's a lot of people that are struggling to get on disability. There's a Facebook group that I'm in, and there's numerous people that have reported that they're not very successful in getting on disability, getting the benefits they need. They're running into a lot of problems with it because what we're experiencing is not really acknowledged yet.
Martina Sherman, are you seeing a number of long COVID patients that, because of their symptoms, cannot work or continue their careers at this point?
Yes, definitely. And what's interesting is we've received a lot of calls, inquiries from people who are contemplating applying for disability, but our firm has yet to see a case of benefits that have been denied where a claimant is forced to appeal. Now, our firm doesn't do Social Security. We concentrate in private employee benefits. But we suspect that we're right on the cusp of a deluge of claims and sadly denials. But I'm not. It saddens me to hear what the audio that you just played of the gentleman who's having difficulty getting information, and that's part of why we're here tonight, is to try and answer some of the questions and get information in the hands of the people that need it.
Right. That's why you're hearing. Dr. Davidson, back to you and back to some of these symptoms. Is there anything known about who they're impacting? I mean, if you had pre-existing conditions, are you more likely to get these symptoms? And then how long they may last?
Now, that's a great question, because this looks very different than the acute syndrome of COVID, where we thought about it was more elderly people with comorbid diseases that were developing the acute symptoms of hospitalization, intensive care unit, ventilators. This has been predominantly a young population. The first 900 patients we've seen, the average age is 49, and 2/3 are women. And only the minority of these patients have ever been hospitalized. In fact, only about 5% were in an ICU, and only about 14% were actually hospitalized. So these are people that had mild symptoms that either went away and then developed secondary symptoms, or had mild symptoms that then progressed. But they were generally outpatients, which is very different than what we saw in the acute phase of this.
So not a big overlap between those that really struggled with COVID and those that are experiencing these long symptoms. Martina, you mentioned that private employers are playing ball here in granting disability, and you're worried about the Social Security Administration. They did send a statement saying, quote, a person who has limitations resulting from COVID which have met or expected to meet our duration requirement could be found disabled if their limitations equal a medical listing or if the combination of those limitations and vocational factors prevent them from working. Social Security's current disability policy rules are able to evaluate COVID-19 cases. What obstacles do you expect for people that apply for disability benefits through Social Security?
Oh, well, it's very interesting, the statement that you just provided, because practitioners have been waiting for the Social Security Administration to issue guidance advising of how they're going to be applying these durational requirements for COVID-19 and long COVID survivors. The Social Security Administration requires that a disabling impairment last 12 months, be expected to last 12 months or result in death.
And so we don't know if it would last 12 months at this point. There's just no data.
Right. The pandemic has only been in existence for 13 or 14 months. So there's a lot of unknowns. The other thing to keep in mind is that Social Security disability benefit proceedings are a lengthy administrative process. And these numbers are about 10 years old, but the last time that I'm aware that there were statistics conducted, something like 70% of initial applications for Social Security disability benefits were denied. And the people who were approved were people who had legal blindness or kidney failure or cancer, terminal illness. And then at the second stage in the process, which is the reconsideration stage, 90% of claims are denied.
Wow. So
and at the hearing stage, which can take 2 years to get to, it's more like 50%.
So this is a cumbersome process, and it doesn't portend well for COVID. Dr. Davidson, have you found treatments that have mitigated some of these symptoms or could eradicate them?
Yeah, I think that's the good news, that many of these patients, although can return to work in a limited fashion, a few hours a day, are gradually getting better. It may be slower than they anticipate, but they are getting better. We have relied primarily on therapies that we've used for other traditional lung diseases, incentive spirometry, inhalers, cardiac medications that prevent lightheadedness and dizziness. So we're relying on medications we've used for other diseases that have the same type of symptoms. There really aren't medications directed toward long haulers. In particular, most of the focus early on, remember, was on the acute illness. But we are seeing people getting better, and I think that's the part I'd like the people to take away from this. This is not necessarily a life sentence.
Some hopeful news there. Okay, very interesting discussion, and our thanks to Martina Sherman and Dr. Charles Davidson for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, can philanthropy help solve racial inequities? But first, we take a look at the weather.
For a lot of people, the word philanthropy conjures a mental image of elderly, wealthy, and white. And studies show that image isn't far from reality. According to a 2020 study, 92% of foundation presidents and 83% of full-time staff members are, in fact, white, a factor that can affect what initiatives get funding and how much they receive. But after a year that has laid bare persistent inequities in everything from healthcare outcomes to criminal justice, leaders of philanthropic organizations are reassessing how and to whom they are lending their support. Joining us now are Liz Thompson, founder and president of the nonprofit Cleveland Avenue Foundation for Education, Tawa Mitchell, senior program officer at the MacArthur Foundation and co-chair of the Chicago African Americans in Philanthropy Leadership Team, and Monique Brunson-Jones, president and CEO of Forefront, Illinois' statewide association representing grant makers and nonprofits. Thanks to all three of you for joining us. Monique Brunson-Jones, let's start with you, please. What is unique about the Black philanthropic approach?
Thank you for having me. It is so unique for Black representation because what we do, the approach, is more of a content and context expert. The approach is near and dear to a community that we live in, an experience that we've had. And so we want to partner in a way that shows how we've experienced that and the value of the people who are currently trying to tackle the issue. It's very much a way of living.
Liz Thompson, how did you and your husband, Don Thompson, become involved in philanthropy?
Well, Brandis, it's something that we've done all of our lives. I mean, you know, in our community, philanthropy is a big word, and we always thought of it as giving back. So it's something that was in our DNA from our family. And it's something that we always wanted to do if given the resources to be able to do it. And we always knew that education would be the key lever that we would want to pull in order to be able to give back. And so it's just something that we've been committed to virtually all of our lives.
And I want to come back to that focus on education in a little bit. But Tawa Mitchell, in roles like yours at the MacArthur Foundation, does your identity inform your approach to the job?
Every day, I think as a native Southsider and Chicagoan, I bring my full self to the work that we do at the MacArthur Foundation on the Chicago Commitment. Thinking about growing up in South Shore, which was such a rich and wealthy community of mostly African Americans who gave their time, their talent, their treasure to their community and working hard every day, but often in our neighborhood, lacking the resources, the amenities and other attributes that people in other communities take for granted. So funding community and economic development and having that background, often I center my neighbors, my community in the work that we do in trying to achieve our goals. And less than 2% of funding nationally goes to Black communities, Black-led organizations, according to data that we have available. And so its representation matters, if only to change those statistics and change our approach to giving.
On that note, Monique Brunson-Jones, how can diversity in philanthropy help to advance racial equity goals?
You know, it gives us an opportunity to really look at our root causes. And so people who are, as you noticed here with Liz and Tawa, engaged in the way that we are, it gives us an opportunity to look at the approach and create spaces for power dynamic shifting. It really gives us an opportunity to look at how we are making sure that we're sustainable with our grant making or sustainable with our giving, and we're using the dollars to move the needle forward racially based on where we know our communities are oppressed, where we know we are getting the biggest bang for our buck, if you will, and engaging in a way that gives us the opportunity to do long-term sustainability work in our communities.
Tawa Mitchell, how has the last year, both with regards to the pandemic as well as this racial reckoning, affected the way organizations are giving?
I think there is now a recognition that we are facing a twin pandemic of both systemic racism in addition to the COVID-19 pandemic. And this racism has been a scourge on our society and something that has affected us long before this disease. And I think philanthropic organizations are now recognizing that they can't tackle one without the other. And so shifting, not just making statements about intent, but shifting grant making to get to the communities that are in need the most is something that all of our foundations are really striving to do. And I think one of the things that's unique about Chicago African Americans or in philanthropy or CAPE is that it's an opportunity to bring all of these great ideas together, foundations, private, public, large and small, coming together in forums to discuss best practices and how to ensure that we're getting the money to the communities, to the neighborhoods where it's needed most.
And Liz, in December 2020, the Cleveland Avenue Foundation, you all launched the 1954 Project, obviously a nod to the 1954 Supreme Court Brown versus the Board of Education decision. But that project raised $100 million to support Black leaders in education over the next 5 years. And you mentioned that you knew that you wanted to focus on education in your philanthropy. Why education in particular?
There's been such a rich tradition of valuing education in the Black community for hundreds of years. You know, so many people risk their lives just to be able to learn how to read as a means to freedom, if nothing but freedom of the mind. And so there has been this incredible tradition of valuing education. For my husband and I, we met at Purdue University. Education was our pathway towards success. And so we knew that for many other young people like us, it would be the same. That journey would be the same for them. And so while we're on the path to raising $100 million, we're not quite there yet. We know that valuing the leaders in education, Black leaders in education, will be key, because there's so many statistics, Brandis, that cite when you have a Black educator in the classroom, in the school building as superintendents, the stats for young people increase in the positive ways, so many of them. And so we decided to focus in that area for better outcomes for all children. And in fact, we have our inaugural event coming up this Wednesday, the 28th at 11 a.m. Central Time, where we hope you will come and meet the inaugural cohort of our 1954 leaders, luminaries, as we're calling them.
And congrats on that event, that inaugural event. Monique, in about 45 seconds, how can the current systems be made more welcoming to Black philanthropists?
It's important for us to start looking at our policies and procedures. And we talk about institutional philanthropy. I came to this role with a background as a philanthropist and as a nonprofit worker, looking at how we invite that Black philanthropists to the table. For instance, the amount that's needed to start a donor advised fund. Those institutional parameters need to change. How we engage in communities and how we hire and how we promote in Black philanthropy and institutions need to be really thoughtfully looked at, and power dynamics need to shift majorly in order to make the changes that we need to see in our communities.
Okay, that's where we'll have to leave it. A lot to think about. My thanks to Monique Brunson-Jones, Liz Thompson, and Tawa Mitchell for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
According to a Drexel University study, 42% of young adults with autism never worked for pay in their 20s, a statistic that reflects the difficulty many people with autism can have in making the transition from school into the working world. But a Chicago woman has cooked up a way for those young adults to develop crucial social and work skills while contributing their own unique flavors to the business. Chicago Tonight's Erica Gunderson has the story.
We've got some vanilla cupcakes here. Some are filled with coconut cream and others are filled with passion fruit.
The aromas wafting through this West Side kitchen make it obvious where the sweet in the name Unique Sweets comes from.
We're topping them with some coconut. That's what Shannon's doing here.
I'm putting coconut on for the cupcakes to make it pretty.
And then Jeremiah's cutting marshmallows, and then that'll be the final product.
The unique part? That's another story.
The treats that we make are unique, especially since they're made by unique individuals, hence Unique Sweets.
Christina Torres and her fellow bakers are members of the social enterprise Unique Sweets. By baking treats like these cupcakes, which they sell at pop-up events and through social media, the teens and young adults with autism who participate are developing work and social skills. Founder Lisa Curiel says there is a place for everyone to contribute in their kitchen.
Autism is different for everybody. There's no two people that are the same or that experience it the same. We try to find something for everybody. And everybody transitions through all of the process so that everyone has an opportunity to find what they like.
Lisa started Unique Sweets from her home kitchen in 2018 to help her son Sebastian, who has autism, bridge the gap between school and the working world.
He had finished high school and he was in City College and he wasn't ready to get a job, and I felt like him and his friends had so much potential. And one day, the story is, and we laugh about it, is that they had a party and they all brought baked goods. And it just struck me as though this was something that we could combine, use a little project management, use some job skills training, and then bake because they like to bake, and it was kind of an instant project. And that's how it started.
Sebastian is no longer in the kitchen, but Lisa says he is still using skills he learned through Unique Sweets to help it grow.
He works with me on purchasing and inventory and getting things ready for the actual bake and all that background work that has to happen. Not everybody wants to pursue a degree in pastry or culinary arts. Whatever you're going to do, you're going to have to interact with others, you're going to have to plan. And what I hope that they get from their time with us is a sense of achievement, that they can do it and that they can take those skills and apply them to the next chapter in their life.
In David Figueroa's case, he found a way to use his art skills to decorate more than cupcakes.
David loves to draw. That is his thing. He'll do art to go with that holiday or whatever we're doing. And then he'll put a message on there, and then he puts it right on the box when it's ready to get picked up.
David is nonverbal, which his mother says sometimes made it difficult to find community.
We have had a really hard time finding organizations and things where he can be a part of, where what he enjoys and his, what he's able to do is highlighted. And so it made me feel like he had a place, there was something for him, that he can have there was a future for him. It made us feel better about our future in terms of, his independence.
Omaida says she too has found a sense of belonging with Unique Sweets.
It's given me an opportunity to find people that kind of have the same struggles that I do and have the same celebrations that I do.
And for baker Cristina Torres, bringing her own unique flavor to that community is helping her flourish.
When we did the Boricua Barrio Arts Festival in Humboldt Park, and when we were, selling out all those cupcakes, especially the different flavors like the coquito, the piña colada, the pancha, that kind of gave me the indication that where I felt like I'm where I need to be right now.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Erica Gunderson.
Looks delicious. You can find more on Unique Sweets on our website.
Absolutely.
And that's our show for this Monday night.
Don't ever watch that on an empty stomach. Lesson learned. Please join us tomorrow night live at 7.
And join me in just a few minutes for our Black Voices Community Conversation. We're talking with community organizers along with current and former police officers about former Minneapolis officer Derek Chauvin's conviction in the killing of George Floyd. It's tonight at 8. Visit WTTW.com/events to RSVP. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe. Good night.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.